Stephanie Register. I'm the principal planner with the City of Trenton. You know what, let me turn my phone down because I hate for one of my grandkids to call. Okay. And I am really grateful to be a part of this process. I'm really grateful that you guys are out this nice afternoon. You know, we could be taking a stroll from Millville Park at the Trenton Market, but guess what, we're here, so thank you. As you guys know, in 2017, the City of Trenton adopted its first comprehensive master plan, named Trenton 250, which we call it the Trenton 250 Master Plan. And we're excited because that actually is the first comprehensive master plan that the City of Trenton adopted, where it encompasses everything that's involved with land development and also social equity, all the great things that comprise what do we need to develop and make up a city. So with that, we found out also, because of what our master plan entails, that we needed to update our regulatory process, which is our zoning ordinance. As you can see, the arrows were pointing that way going forward. Today is the meeting that we're talking about the technical review report and the redevelopment area plans. The City of Trenton hired a consulting firm called Camiros, which they'll introduce themselves a little later, along with their subcontractors, WRT, Willits, and what is it? Willits and...
I just call him Rob Beckelman.
Rob Beckelman, yes, who is the legal firm, because we all know that when we're talking about regulatory processes, it becomes legalistic. So we need to make sure that we have our legal team on board. With that, I'm not going to say too much because they are our consultants, they are the professionals. So I'm going to ask that you lend an ear to what they have to say. And if you have any questions, please ask them. They are here for all of the good stuff for land use processes, and also for the public meetings that are coming up soon. This is the whole process that will be happening, and hopefully at the end of this process, we will have a land development ordinance that we can understand. No pun intended. So, Arissa, you can go on up and introduce yourself as you know best.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. So we are from Camiros. Chris will be speaking to you, so you'll see him in a minute. And what we're here today to talk about is mainly this report, the Technical Review and Approaches Report. It's located on the Trenton website, just to say, so you can download it there and read it. In addition, there's a redevelopment areas analysis report. You can read that as well. Just one thing to say, because I notice this sometimes happens. If you go to this website, and I'll put it up at the end of the presentation as well, you can get these reports, but we're also going to have this entire presentation up there as well for you to download, so you don't have to furiously take notes or take pictures of it. We'll have this whole thing up there as it is for you to take a look at later at your pleasure. So Stephanie touched on this, kind of why we're here and why we're doing this LDO update. There's a number of reasons, but the primary one is to align it with Trenton 250. Really take what is in those plans, those policies, those plans, those ideas that you have, and translate them into a regulatory document that reflects them. And it's a really well done plan, so it gives us a lot of guidance in terms of doing that. The other things are, if you've ever looked at your current ordinance, it's a little hard to understand. It's a little confusing. There's layers of it. Things cross-reference things that may or may not be there. There's no real graphics associated with it. So a lot of this is really reorganizing it so it's user-friendly, easy to understand. Somebody off the street can just grab it, pick it up, and understand what's going on. We also want to ensure high quality of development here in Trenton. So it's things like bringing in design standards and the like to make sure that we've got the right land use controls in place to get the kind of uses and buildings and new construction that you want, as well as preserving those great buildings that you have now. And then finally, transparency, making sure that the administrative process is easy for everybody to understand. If I need a variance or if I need a conditional use, this is the process I have to go through for that. So one of the first things that makes an ordinance much easier to understand, it's kind of a basic structural principle, is to compartmentalize, basically put things that are similar together into their own chapters and then group those chapters together. So there's logical chunks of things going on. As you see, what we've proposed is the idea of, the introductory chapters talk about what this ordinance is, what are the definitions. Then it follows with really the heart of the LDO, which is the district standards. And as you can see, they mimic the categories that you've got going on here in Trenton 250. So commercial, mixed use, industrial, residential neighborhoods, really creating districts that reflect what's in Trenton 250. Uses, outlining what kind of uses are allowed within each of the districts. Then the development standards, and these are things like your parking, your signs, your landscape, your accessory structures like garages and fences and home occupations, and grouping all of those together, kind of everything else that takes place on the lot. Then we kind of get into the more kind of administrative part of the ordinance towards the end, your zoning approvals. How do I apply for a C or a D variance? What's the process? Who's responsible for that? The historic regulations, where we're bringing in the kind of administrative sections of historic districts and landmarks. We're not touching anything that's been landmarked or districted, so don't come to us with that. We are not touching it. We are leaving that as it is. We're just organizing how that gets done and reviewed. Then subdivision, which is just the splitting up of a lot. So basically taking a look at that, how do we split the regulation, or how do we do, what is required when we split a lot, and what's the process for doing that. And then finally, things like nonconformities. I was a legal use before, and now I'm not allowed in the district. What can I do? What can't I do? Really explaining that. And enforcement. So again, kind of the big part was how do we organize the compartmentalization, but the other thing is, as I kind of mentioned, a lot of graphics. We want this to have a very graphic orientation so you can understand both in the text as well as in the pictures. Definitions, making sure all terms are defined so that you can understand what's in the ordinance, not having to come to the city to get an explanation each time of what does this mean, how is this applied, which kind of brings it into the measurement methodologies, making sure you've got one set in place. How do I measure building height? It's found in this section, and it's only one way to do it. It's not confused throughout the different sections. So kind of the first major one, reorganization principle that we're also looking at is the use structure, and it's the idea of kind of taking a new approach to uses. You've got kind of bits and pieces of things going on in your districts. In some cases, they're very specific about the uses you can have. In other cases, they're very general, but then list a bunch of prohibited uses. In other cases, they reference other districts and then add things on top. And what that does is it creates a very confusing structure for somebody to understand what can I do with my lot in this district. And what we want to do is tie the form of the district and the uses in the district together so that you can see if I'm in this district, this is what I can do because this is the intent of the district. We know some uses, while we want to move to a more generic approach, as that chart shows you, instead of shoe store, clothing store, record store, bookstore, moving just to retail goods establishment. We know there's some specific uses we'll still need to call out just because they're sensitive. Things like drive-thrus or adult uses. They can't be grouped in these big categories, so we're going to bring them out separately. And then understanding some have impacts, so we're going to tie standards to some of these. I think drive-thru is probably the best example of that. You would have a drive-thru allowed in some districts, but there's going to be requirements for screening it from the adjacent properties, where the drive-thru lane can go, how that's designed so that it's always a safe set of circulation standards tied to it. So what you'll see in your current ordinance has big old lists of uses. It's going to move to a matrix format. And this is not Trenton. This is another community, so nobody try to find what you can do here because it's not going to match up. This is Oak Park, Illinois, much smaller, much different set of uses and districts here. But you can see going down the line for each district, it's just telling you whether something is permitted or special. Here in Trenton, it's called conditional. What uses are allowed, and if it's blank, I can't have it. So as you go down the district, you can see exactly what you can and can't do and how you can do it if it needs that special approval. What's good about this is it allows you two ways into the use structure. There's two ways to do this. So either I own a piece of property in this district and I want to know what I can do, I just go down the list, I can see the uses that are allowed. Or let's say I want to open an art gallery, I can go down across and I can see exactly what districts that would be allowed in. So it makes it a lot easier to understand, it's more business friendly, and it's clearer for neighborhoods to understand what can happen next to them in the neighborhoods that surround them or if they're adjacent to a business area. And then again, as I pointed out, certain uses end up with standards and we want to reference those in the table so people are always aware that that's happening. Trenton's a very cool city, and it's got a lot of potential for a lot of these new and emerging uses, the cool uses as people call them. I'm 43, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that anymore. So the idea is things like the corner stores and microbreweries and specialty food, which is things like coffee roasters, craft industrial spaces, because you've got this great kind of old urban fabric warehouse character, how can we reuse those to these kind of creative maker type uses? So we want to make sure that we bring those kind of uses into the ordinance. And then the reality that every city, village, town is dealing with, no matter what the size is what uses are very sensitive. And as we're all kind of aware, because we all watch the news, we have to deal with social service uses. We have to deal with things like drug treatment centers. These are becoming far more of an issue for communities, and we want to make sure we get ahead of that and handle it proactively, acknowledging that they're coming in and how do we work that, and what are the use standards that get associated with those. And then finally, in the use structure, one of the other things that's kind of a great way for businesses to get started is through the temporary use structure. You got some that are pretty common. If I'm building a building, I'm going to have a temporary contractor's office, temporary contractor's yard. We deal with that, that's fine. But we also have things like temporary outdoor entertainment, outdoor sales, food trucks. These are ways to start new avenues of entrepreneurship and kind of bring in, again, that maker creative feeling to the city. Things like farmers markets and just craft sales and the like. So we can cover those with the right permissions so they just don't happen randomly. We've got control over them and we know when they're coming, even tying them to some other city initiatives. And then finally, uses to revitalize. As I mentioned, you've got these great old buildings, in particular older industrial buildings, and you've already seen, and we've seen when we toured the city, a bunch of great conversions. I think that's from one of them, and I forgot the name of it. But the idea is, how do we build in those permissions to allow buildings to do that in a much easier fashion? In addition, we know that there's been issues before with larger residential structures being illegally converted into apartments, but there's also the acknowledgement that that may be a desirable effect in some areas if it's managed properly. So rather than just kind of ignoring it, the idea is in the ordinance we can build in standards that help to allow that to happen in the right places and in the right way when we want it to. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris Jeanette from Camiros, who will introduce himself and he's going to take you through the districts.
Well, the reduction's kind of redundant at this point since you just did it, but yeah. I'm Chris Jeanette. I'm a senior associate with Camiros. I want to kind of launch into a little bit of a relationship between the future land use plan that's in Trenton 250 and the work that we're doing here. So a large component of sort of our analysis at the outset of this process has been to look at the future land use designations that are on the map in Trenton 250 and really take guidance from how those might be translated into zoning districts moving forward. It's actually a really great plan in that it provides us a lot of specific guidance that we can kind of just pull into zoning language. It talks about things like district character, form, building height, even uses that might be appropriate for different land use categories. So it's been really helpful to us in that regard. Another component of the work at the outset has been analysis of the redevelopment area plans that are in place here in Trenton. There are over 40 of them, so it's been no mean feat to kind of suss them out and figure out what's in each one of them. WRT has done that work, and Wu is here. You can take any questions at the end of the presentation that you have specific to these. But what it's really kind of allowed us to do is to take the redevelopment area plans as well as the current zoning and compare those to the vision that's established in the comprehensive plan and say, are the regulatory tools that we have in place now really enabling us to fulfill that vision, or are they standing in the way? And what can we change to bring that vision into fruition? Some of the redevelopment area plans are specific in their guidance, and they might indicate that we need specific zoning districts to help implement the guidance that's in those plans. And also, this gives us the opportunity to just kind of minimize another layer of regulation that's in place here in the city. If we can actually take what's in a redevelopment area plan and just accommodate that through a base district, that makes things more predictable, it makes them easier to administer moving forward. So you'll see there are some maps in the back here. This is just one showing where all of the 41 redevelopment area plans are located in the city, and then another one calling out the priority redevelopment areas that were established in Trenton 250 and kind of reinforced through WRT's analysis of these plans. So I'm going to talk a little bit also about our approach to updating the regulatory controls. So Trenton is a great historic city, tons of varied character areas, and currently 10 zoning districts in their entirety. So there's no real magic number of districts that's capable of accommodating the character of any city. But for a place like Trenton, in our analysis, 10 is really not enough to kind of cover all the districts. So we've proposed kind of a restructuring of all of the districts from residential through commercial, mixed use, and industrial. And we've also made some more generic recommendations, which I'll go through on this slide. So the first of those is refinements to yard regulations for residential structures, specifically the inclusion of a corner side yard requirement, which is not currently within the ordinance, but that specifically addresses sort of that corner side condition where my side yard is actually kind of next to someone else's front yard, and how do we make sure that that's consistent along a block. We're recommending reduction of the front yard setback for row house dwellings. Certain districts right now allow a 0-foot setback, so I can build my row house right up at the lot line. And then other districts require 20-foot setback, which is really out of character for that row house style development. So we want to correct that and make sure that the pattern of development that's here already can be continued moving forward. We're recommending eliminating what's called the special building setback line, which is kind of a weird provision that's in the ordinance right now that actually requires a special setback from the center line of the right-of-way along specific streets within the city. And it's not entirely clear, the application of that or how it would work moving forward, specifically with the future land use of Trend 250 in mind. And the other thing is that as we're moving forward and kind of broadening the number of districts within the city, that we can address those specific conditions that this special building setback line was intended to address originally. We're proposing adding a maximum impervious surface for residential lots. Currently, the city has a lot coverage maximum, which includes everything that's impervious on a lot, so buildings, accessory structures, driveways, sidewalks, patios, all that stuff. What we're proposing is splitting that into two different regulations. So one would be a building coverage maximum, which would just cover the principal building and accessory structures. So how big can my principal building and accessory structures be? And then another maximum, which would be impervious surface, which would include the principal, accessory, and then all the other stuff, similar to the current coverage. And what sort of that two-pronged approach allows us to do is to kind of more closely control the size of buildings as well as lot coverage to make sure that we're getting new development and infill development that's a lot more contextual and that kind of fits into the neighborhoods in a more natural way. We're also proposing eliminating minimum net habitable floor area. A lot of modern ordinances are doing away with minimum floor areas for dwelling units. It can often kind of butt up against the city's larger goals of availability of housing and affordability of housing, and can often be kind of prohibitive of certain development forms that the city might want to see in terms of things like studio units and micro housing. So we're proposing getting rid of that minimum floor area requirement. And also removing residential infill consistency requirements. So this is a requirement that says, if I'm building a new house in a residential neighborhood, I need to look at all the other houses within 200-foot radius of where I'm building, and I need to take my cues from them in terms of roof pitch, number and design of windows and doors, building materials, siding materials, and a whole bunch of other kind of specific things. The issue with this is that it's a little bit too prescriptive in terms of what I can do in terms of building an infill residence. And so what we're proposing is doing away with that really kind of prescriptive guidance, which can also, depending on those materials and the size of the existing houses, can often be cost prohibitive for people to come in and redevelop housing where housing is needed. We're proposing just to simplify those through a set of standards that would really address the form through things like building height, building orientation, building setbacks, so that the rhythm there that's established is continued, but we're not necessarily continuing the design of windows and doors and seeing all the same materials. And then in the commercial districts, what we've done is we've sort of broadened the palette of commercial districts that we're recommending so that we're making sure that we're really addressing the varied scales of commercial development within the city. Everything from neighborhood commercial to the highest intensity downtown commercial to general kind of corridor commercial that you see described in the city. We've evaluated things like maximum building heights in all of the districts, and we're making recommendations for new building heights. And an important distinction too, just to point out, is that we've recommended eliminating regulating height via stories. It's kind of an inflexible way of doing it. A more modern way is just to kind of move to maximum height in feet, which allows more flexibility for developers and builders to kind of build more modern, desirable spaces. And what we're really trying to get at is this idea of high quality design, right? So what we're doing is we're building in things like commercial design standards into some of the commercial districts, thinking about things like what's the minimum transparency on the ground floor of a commercial building, meaning if I'm inside, can I see out to the sidewalk? If I'm not on the sidewalk, can I see into the building? It really kind of plays at these ideas of both public safety as well as the idea of walkability. If I'm walking down Broad Street or State Street, and I'm seeing people in restaurants, it becomes kind of a much more lively experience to be on the sidewalk. Other controls, such as form-based controls, might be more appropriate for specific districts like downtown. So before I was talking about a 0-foot setback for townhouse development, what a form-based control might do is downtown, it might say you have to build to a 0-foot setback point. So you've got to bring your building right up to the sidewalk. You have to have a ground floor that's at least 12 feet tall so that we're getting that nice walkable kind of pedestrian environment. those types of controls that really aren't dealing necessarily with the design of buildings, but just kind of with the basic building blocks, the form and placement of buildings in certain districts. And then we're also recommending some changes to the way that the city is currently requiring open space and public art. It's a really good start, what's in the current ordinance. We think it could be tailored a little bit more appropriately to a district structure so that we're getting the right types of open space in the right places, the things that the city wants to see, as well as the right kind of public art in the right places. And we're recommending also that the city explores an option for a fee in lieu for public art, similar to the fee in lieu for open space that's in place right now. All right, this is the most fun part. I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible. There are no pictures, so everybody buckle in. So Trenton 250 divides residential land use in the city into 3 categories: a low density, a medium density, and a high density. And what we've done is we've really kind of looked at each one of those classifications and compared them to where they're mapped, looking at the lot sizes that are actually on the ground today and the development that's in those areas that are classified as those 3 different categories. And what we've done is we've looked at that patterning and proposed a series of districts that we think kind of bridges the gap between what's envisioned in Trenton 250 and what is actually currently on the ground. So in terms of the neighborhood residential low density land use category, we're proposing 3 single-family districts. They're the RL districts. So we've got RL1, which requires a minimum lot area of 8,000 square feet to build a single-family dwelling. That's larger than any minimum lot area that the city currently has, but it's also a little bit smaller than what's recommended in Trenton 250, which is more along the lines of a 10,000 square foot minimum, which really is not kind of seen anywhere throughout the city. We've got an RL2, which requires 6,000 square feet, which is really kind of a reorientation or a continuation of the current RA district. And then we've got the RA3, which requires 4,000 square feet and is much more in line with the current RB1 district. In terms of medium density, we've got a series, again, of 3 districts, 1 new one and 2 based on existing ones. These would allow single-family and semi-detached single-family, as well as row house in the RM3, and they require a 6,000 square foot, a 3,000 square foot, and a 1,500 square foot. So again, kind of working up in density as we move down the list here. And then residential high density, these are 2 new districts that we're proposing. RH1, which would allow all dwelling types, everything from single-family all the way up to multifamily on lots that are a minimum of 3,000 square feet. And then the RH2, which would be by far the densest in the city, allowing all of those dwelling types on lots as small as 1,000 square feet, which is actually a pretty predominant development pattern if you look around the way that Trenton is developed today. In terms of the commercial districts, we're recommending an NC neighborhood commercial, which is based upon the neighborhood commercial land use category in Trenton 250, and also loosely based on the city's current business B district. This would be a district that kind of is really designed to serve the everyday needs of neighborhood residents that would be living adjacent to one of these commercial areas. So it would allow kind of a mixture of housing as well as lower intensity commercial uses, a maximum 40-foot height, as well as key design standards that we would build into this district to kind of make sure that we're encouraging compatibility and requiring certain things that help commercial uses really blend into that sort of mixture of residential and commercial. The Main Street Corridor Commercial District, which is based on the Main Street corridor designation in Trenton 250. This would be more intense than the neighborhood commercial, allow for a mixture of uses. Everything, including multifamily, would be permitted here, up to 60 feet in height, and this might be a place that's appropriate for some form-based controls, as I spoke about earlier, to really make sure that we're reinforcing that Main Street character, that really walkable kind of downtown Main Street character. The mixed-use corridor commercial, which is based on the corridor mixed-use designation in Trenton 250, would allow some limited residential mixing in with commercial and office uses, a little bit lower height, a little bit less intensity in terms of what we're allowing there in terms of building height, and again, some key design standards that really kind of serve to step down a little bit while making sure that we're addressing, again, those basic tenets of the building design. Also a series of mixed-use districts that we're proposing. The mixed-use flex is based off the live-work designation within the Trenton 250 plan. This would really be a district that is intended to encourage adaptive reuse in certain areas within the city. It would allow 60 feet in height and also probably contain some design standards to ensure that we're as we're adaptively reusing buildings, we're ensuring that they blend in kind of seamlessly with the existing neighborhood. The mixed-use transition zone, which would allow 50 feet in height. This is really a mixed-use zone that's intended to transition from those areas that are a little bit more intensely developed with commercial and mixed-use uses, kind of stepping down into some of those lower intensity, lower scale districts, maybe even including the residential districts as well. And design standards to ensure that that intensity in the form of the buildings as well as the rhythm of the buildings is really kind of accommodating that transition from intense development to neighborhood development. The CA Creative Arts District came out of the Trenton Arts and Focus Plan that was adopted in 2016. Similar to the mixed-use flex in its purpose, but with kind of a stronger encouragement of arts-oriented uses in terms of adaptive reuse, and again, some key design standards. One of the interesting things is as we actually get into drafting these districts, we might find that the Creative Arts District and the Mixed-Use Flex District are redundant, and so we just need to keep one of them. The nice thing about this at this point is that we wanted to include it just to make sure that we're getting the gist of that plan pushed forward into the regulatory structure as well. There's a TOD, Transit-Oriented Development District, that we're proposing, really designed to get at those areas around the transit amenities within the city. So the Trenton Transit Center, the light rail, this would allow a little bit more height, a little bit more intensity to really kind of encourage a density of development around that access to transit where it makes sense. And then the Downtown Trenton District, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's the most intense mixed-use district within the city. It's really the character of the city, the identity of the city. We want to make sure that we're allowing that character and that identity to continue, allowing a 210-foot maximum building height, as well as, I mentioned form-based standards previously. Downtown is obviously a great place to think about using some form-based standards, taking our cues from the development that's already here and building in some standards that reinforces that basic character. Moving into the industrial districts, based upon the commercial light industrial land use designation in Trenton 250, we've got the IL light industrial. Pretty self-explanatory. It's light industrial uses, stuff that doesn't necessarily have undue impacts on surrounding adjacent uses, mostly takes place indoors. We would allow a 50-foot height for a district like this. Moving into the general industrial, which is a little bit heavier than the light industrial uses, more likely to have some impacts on adjacent uses. So for a district like this, we would think a little bit more about things like how are we making sure that adequate buffers are in place so that the noise, the dust, the heat, the glare doesn't necessarily move from that industrial use into the adjacent areas. And then the industrial mixed use district. This is an interesting one, kind of playing at that idea that Arista had mentioned, the wealth of historic structures, particularly kind of those older industrial structures that might no longer be suitable for industrial uses, but are suitable for a whole range of other types of uses, like commercial uses and even residential uses. Something like an industrial mixed use area would kind of facilitate that transition from an older industrial area to something that's, it's got the dog daycares, it's got the CrossFit gyms, it's got the breweries. These types of areas that you see popping up in other cities that really take advantage of the bones of those types of areas. The institutional district, which is based off the institutional category in Trenton 250, really dealing with healthcare, education, government, those types of uses that have a more campus-like environment. And what this one is really concerned about is not even so much of the interior of these campus-like environments, but really the edges where they meet the surrounding fabric of the city, and how those relationships and how those adjacencies are really handled on the campuses. And then finally, the OSR, Open Space and Recreation, which is based on a similar designation in the land use plan. Active and passive recreation, it's parks, it's playgrounds. A lot of times, these are currently just mapped to other districts, and the benefit of kind of moving them into their own district is that it's a protection for them. So if anyone ever wanted to come in and redevelop a park or a playground in the city, they'd actually have to go through a rezoning process. And putting them in their own district kind of protects them and sets them apart moving into the future. With that, there's still more.
I'm back. So we're not quite done. So we've dealt with really the heart of it, talking about uses, talking about the districts. And so what we want to do is kind of talk about the other things that happen on a site and kind of the other impacts we're concerned about. One of these is accessory structures, and really clarifying and giving you like a full set of what a city would have in terms of accessory structures. And this includes everything from your typical shed, garage, fences, to things that are more sustainable in nature, things like solar panels and wind turbines. Where can they go? Where can you have them? How do you address the impacts? as well as moving into things like even urban agriculture. If you're, want to look at the raising of chickens and the keeping of bees, how do we allow for that? Many urban areas are allowing for this, so the idea is to bring those in. We also we approach this, and this is something that would be vetted out through the kind of longer term process, is accessory dwelling units, also called granny flats, carriage houses, coach houses, an apartment above the garage. Do we want to allow for those? Where do we want to allow for them, and how do we want to control them? They're typically tied to single family, or they could be tied to row house development. So, do we need a certain lot size before we can have that going on? Just so you can diversify the type of housing stock that's available, and give people options in terms of kind of how they can create income for their own units. And then finally, permitted encroachments. This is really nothing more than the architectural features on a house. So if you have an eave, it talks about how far it can go into a yard. Really just kind of making those rules clear so you can continue the type of unique architecture that's present here within the city. Parking is always a big deal, as we learned as we circled for a while trying to find a parking space here. I think we all did, those who didn't walk or bike. So the idea is, how do we manage it? And it is the downtown, so you want parking difficulties in your downtown, quite frankly. It's always typically a good sign. But, how do we manage this? How do we make it clear? And again, as you saw in that use matrix, you've got that list of uses. We want to tie the amount of parking directly to that list, so you're not making interpretations. If I have this use, this is the amount of parking that's required, and really balance that out. Also looking at things like bicycle parking, kind of bringing that in, which areas is it appropriate to create that kind of interconnected multimodal system. And then certain parking flexibilities. You may want certain districts to not require parking. Certain buildings of a certain age may not require parking. And the idea is you can't make more land out of thin air. And if my building goes from lot line to lot line and the whole area is developed, I can't make more land for parking. And we don't know exactly where these areas are. These are exemptions that are fairly typical. It's part of the analysis as we work through the district structure and kind of see what the existing conditions are as we map it. But we want to look into that. Also encouraging things like car share, bike share, and electric vehicle charging stations, making sure there's opportunities for people to add those to their parking facilities without being penalized in terms of spaces. Related to parking, kind of one of the biggest things is the landscaping of parking lots, and in particular when they face a street. So one of the ideas is to build in landscape requirements that apply across the board to create a consistency. The idea is if my parking lot's fronting on a street or a right-of-way or a park, for example, that you want to have some screening there so you don't see the headlights. Similarly, if I got a large parking lot, I want some landscape within it just to kind of mitigate that heat island effect, take care of some of the rainwater that falls, and make it a more pleasant environment rather than just this giant sea of asphalt where you park your car. Just some examples from another community of where we've done these kind of different options for parking lot screening, as well as looking at kind of how you lay out where parking lot islands go and looking at pedestrian or parking lot connections or landscape connections between islands as well, to really give it a diversity and a good look to it. Finally, signs. We want to take a look at signs. There was a recent Supreme Court decision in 2015 that came down that talked about content neutrality. And like many cities with an older sign code, you're not quite meeting the standards that are in place there. Basically what that decision says is you can't talk about what's on the sign. You can only talk about how big it can be, where it can go, and how long it can be up if it's a temporary sign, but you can't talk about what goes on that sign, any of the content. So we need to fix that to keep you in line with that decision. We want to make sure, as Chris talked about, the form and the scale of the different districts. We want to tailor the signs to that. We don't want signs that are too big going into a neighborhood commercial district, whereas downtown could have more lenient sign standards because the size of the structures are bigger. So we want to tailor that as well. And then finally, you may want to look at some signs that you've had around town forever that may not fit the new standards, but are great and character-giving signs. So what you want to do is classify them as classic signs, which is the proposal. So you may see things like ghost signs, the old signs that were painted on walls. May not allow those anymore, but you want to keep the ones that you have and allow them to be maintained. So there's provisions we can write in that allow those signs to continue and not be considered non-conforming. And just examples of some of the graphics for signs, things like wall signs, addressing new sign types that most sign ordinances haven't addressed if they're older, things like the menu board sign for your drive-thrus. So then we got to get to the end of the ordinance where all the administration kicks in. And our goal here is really to make it as clear as possible. A lot of your processes are dictated by the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law, the NJMLUL. I'm a certified professional planner. I got that a few years ago, but we also have an attorney on the team, Rob Beckelman from WGS, which stands for something that we can never remember because it's a string of lawyer names. And so we're going to make sure that everything lines up with what's required by statute in the state, and really address the various applications that you see in there. Everything from amendments to the C&D variances to the conditional use to a temporary use permit, which would be newer. It's based on the temporary uses I was talking about earlier. Just making sure everything's in there and you can understand everything when you open it up and you say, I need a variance. That process should be very clear to you if it's something very simple, what's required and how that's going to move through the system. Another thing that we wanted to suggest, and this is something that we're still working, we'll be working with the city on as we draft it, is this concept of a plan development. And it's kind of like a redevelopment area plan light, but without any of the tax stuff and all that attached to it. It's really just structured as an approval process over a district. And what it would say is that, say I'm in a commercial mixed-use district, but the thing is, for my really innovative, cool design, I need to go higher, I need to be closer to the setback line, I may need a couple uses the district doesn't allow. I can apply, rather than going through your use variance and your area variance, I can go through a plan development process where I come into the city and say, look, I'm proposing this, it's really cool, it's got all these innovative things going on, I'm reusing these other buildings, how can we make this work? The thing about the PD, the key part of it, it's a negotiation. It's not, I'm coming in with all these things I want to change, it's I'm coming in with all these things I want to change, and you as a city are getting these public benefits and amenities, and you have to list them out. And you have to do negotiation, and it can't be, well, I'm going to put a park bench in the front. It has to be substantial, and the process spells that out. This isn't done under the cover of darkness. This has a public process tied directly to it, so the neighborhood and everybody around it would know that it's going on. There's a preliminary plan, and then there's a final plan, so there's opportunities for public input. So it's something that we'd like you to consider and see if it would work well here to kind of integrate something like this. Also have to do subdivision regulations. Again, that's just when you're kind of dividing up lots, making sure that the right public improvements are being installed when you're putting in new lots, and in particular looking at right-of-way standards, the public realm, looking at that multi-modality where you can be on a bike or you could be walking or you can be driving and you're all accommodated on the street in a safe manner. So we want to look at building that in where you're redoing streets, or if somebody's constructing a new street, making sure that that's all built into that as well. So this is kind of the other administrative section of the LDO. And then finally, as I mentioned, kind of way back, nonconformities. And this is things where I built my house legally 50 years ago, the standards have changed and now it doesn't meet the standards, you become a nonconforming structure. Or I was a legally allowed use, all of a sudden the use permissions change, I'm not allowed in this district anymore, I'm a non-conforming use. So nobody's getting rid of you, let's make that very clear, you're all grandfathered in. These are basically the rules for grandfathering. This basically talks about what can I do, what am I allowed to maintain, what can happen, is there possibilities for expansion, what happens if I get damaged. It just sets out the rules for that as that goes forward. To keep in mind, if something was done illegally, you don't fall under here. If you did it on the wrong side of the law, nonconformities don't make you legal. So that's an important element to remember. So with that, we're happy to take questions. Again, this is the website, Trenton 250 LDO update. Next week, when we get back to Chicago, if you couldn't tell, I'm from Chicago, the presentation will be up there. The reports are up there already. And so basically you can download this and look at all the slides that we put together. And so with that, we're happy to take any questions on the tech report. Rue is here to talk about the redevelopment areas. So that's on, sir.
Hi, yes, Andrew Giraldi. I have some questions with regards to your presentation. First of all, I like the progressive behavior of nature of your proposals. I love it. Some comments and then some brief questions. As far as the parking regulations, I think it would make sense, for inclusion purposes, is if parking garages were included and for zoning purposes, those parking garages were able to be allowed to be converted into some other, say, mixed-use property later on for easy conversion. So maybe say ground floor retail, commercial, and then above it the parking. Another one is with regards to the TOD regulations. I'm not sure if you saw our draft version of the TOD plan, but there are proposals in there or some allowances that maybe building heights could rise up to 18 stories, which really exceeds the 70-foot maximum that I think has been included. As far as questions, one that comes to mind is with regards to temporary uses.
Mhm.
Does that allow for technical urbanism and parklets?
The parklets question is a little bit different because the parklets take place in the public right of way.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different the way those are handled. I know the city's working on some ordinances and stuff for that. We won't be in the way of it,
Sure.
but it's really not the LDO's place to regulate it.
I
There's
see.
nothing that would prohibit it from
Another,
our end.
right. Another question I have is with regards to, I think just how the form-based nature of your proposals ties in the individual nature of the redevelopment plans and zones. Have you factored in the, I guess you say, certain nuances of the different redevelopment zones, and how does the architecture tie that in with each district along the way?
So,
Woo, gets to speak.
yeah, so it's a really good question. We're still working on that.
Okay.
That's my honest answer to that. But
Thank you.
it's very complicated. As Chris and Rista mentioned, I mean, this is an old city, and those redevelopment plans date as far back as 30, 40 years. And the city has changed, times have changed, so we just need to update those redevelopment plans to make it effective, to your point.
Right, and the basis for that question is because I didn't want to see any kind of spot zoning take place, like where
No.
the zoning is so different from another district that it looks like it doesn't fit along the way.
Yeah, no, we're gonna make sure that we don't do that. That's, one of the code of ethics as planners, Arista is a professional planner, so am I. We're not allowed to do that. That's illegal, so.
Okay.
What did he just say that you're commenting is illegal?
Spot zoning.
That's where does everybody know what spot zoning is?
Tell us.
Okay. Spot zoning is when I have a whole block, like say I have this whole block and the whole block is residential. Now that's a bad example. I'm trying to think of a really good example.
What
Well, it
about
could be.
the
So the whole block is
mixed
residential, the blocks around you are residential, and you all of a sudden decide to make one little parcel up here commercial for no real good reason. So it's basically, it's a spot, that's why they call it spot zoning. It's just a spot of something that's incongruous, doesn't match everything else around it.
Well, what if your neighborhood's redevelopment plan has been completed, it was in 1995, and you're in a mixed use your neighborhood is mixed use, it
Mhm.
has residential, commercial, and industrial.
But it would be a mixed-use district, so you wouldn't be just a straight commercial district, you'd be a mixed-use district, which would allow for all of that to happen within the same block. So, by creating that mixed-use zone, you're kind of getting out of that, any kind of spot zoning issue.
No, the neighborhood is already historically mixed use.
No, the districts would cover you, no problems.
And can I just say something? Working with our consultants this go around is really exciting for the city because we're literally looking at the 41 redevelopment areas. And as you see in the comprehensive master plan, Andrew, as you spoke about, we have these 7 priority areas that we're looking to either fold some of the redevelopment areas within those priority areas while we're dissolving the ones that actually have expired. So all of this is a work in tandem with each other, and so we're hoping at the end of this process, with our LDO, we'll have this streamlined into that. So we're looking more at how do we look at those priority areas, inclusive to the redevelopment areas that are already in place without the dissolvement of others.
This is trying to understand all that's been going on. There was a group of people from the Enterprise Foundation, and they were working on a plan to update for the mayor to become an action plan. Is that still in the mix, or have you all taken over their responsibility?
No, we have nothing related to that.
That has actually, again, this is actually the zoning ordinance that actually hopefully we can make this consistent with the master plan. Whatever the political engine is doing, that actually we're hoping to take that information and make that as a part, if it's applicable. At this time, that has nothing to do with our process of us updating the land development ordinance.
But the Enterprise Foundation is still working on the plans that they were.
That's
supposed
something I would have to
get
probably go
for
back to the mayor and
for
find
the
out to see if,
action.
We'll see if that's actually something still in play with the mayor, but because of this, the municipal land use law, and with us updating or actually redeveloping our master plan, we pretty much had to put this in place according to state statute. So this is a legal process that the city, or every city, borough, hamlet in the state of New Jersey has to go through this.
So how can I find out if my neighborhood plan is in this?
You can call me.
There you go.
Yeah, and I was gonna say you could probably, and also, so you guys know, I think you spoke about this earlier in regards to some of the other neighborhood plans that actually been endorsed by the master plan. The Arts District was one of them, the Canal, Creek to Canal, which is one of my, Jim, am I saying that right? That's actually a plan that has been endorsed by the master plan. We are encouraging every neighborhood that if you come up and you work together to put a neighborhood plan together, that you will bring it before planning board, and this is a plan that can be endorsed by our master plan. So again, this is a work in tandem with all the other plans that are in place. However, looking at the plans that are in place to see if they are applicable today, and if not, can we dissolve them? Is there a way that we can bring in other avenues of community perspectives that are working now to actually complement this process, inclusive to working with, and I call the land development, our zoning ordinance, our land Bible. I cannot develop or anything, I have to look at that ordinance to make sure that it's applicable to any development that comes in the city of Trenton. So it is quite crucial that we make this an inclusive process for everyone to be involved.
There's some, I'm going behind you, she had her hand up, and then I'll come back.
Sorry.
That's fine, no, that's fine.
I'm just wondering if there's been any consideration given to how, so I'm thinking specifically about the high priority area, and in particular the area behind the train station, the Walnut, Chestnut, Monmouth Street area, and how that may, how these plans could potentially negatively impact the folks who live in that area who are primarily renters, and who I'm certain the landlords of a lot of those buildings have probably done a lot of illegal things in terms of the way that they have either done renovations or whatever the case may be, which wouldn't be grandfathered into the nonconformities. How that may negatively impact those people living in that area, and what is the contingency plan for that? How will they be supported if for some reason there is an issue that arises and now these people don't have a place to live, because either the landlords are abandoning these buildings because they can't afford to make the changes that they need to make to be, you know, in line with the new ordinances that are put in place, or they're selling them to redevelopers who are then planning to knock these places down. Like, is there a consideration for that, and if so, what is it?
There's a lot going on in that question.
Yes.
So let's start with basically, let's go kind of to the basics of development regulations. If they're illegal now and they stay illegal after this, this ordinance can't fix that. We're not allowed. And so the idea is it's all through enforcement. So what you're saying could happen after this could happen at this very moment right now.
My concern is that there's now a magnifying glass being put on this area that has been long neglected, right? And now, so people are going to be very focused on this particular area where I'm very certain there has been a number of illegal things going on in terms of land development in that area. But now there's going to be, because it's in a high priority zone, this magnifying glass put on it, and it's going to be enforced where it hasn't been previously, and may continue for however long to not have been enforced if there wasn't this magnifying glass being put on it. I'm just concerned about the effects that that will have on the people living there, because this is, you know,
I can answer that question.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Actually, what you're stating is pretty much quality of life issues that actually within a particular area, especially when it's not been quote unquote focused on. One of the things that the city is hoping to do in this process is look at those quality of life issues. Okay, what is applicable for this particular area? Like in your area, say a high percentage of renters. We do have a rent stabilization program. How many people in that neighborhood understand and know about that program? That's really very good for this particular city. However, again, not just the renters, but also the landlords, that if they decide that a developer come in and start building, is this an opportunity to improve that particular property without causing havoc or a negative impact of income on that renter? Your rent stabilization program will be able to address that, but that'll be more of a quality of life versus a land type
And will there be,
Yeah.
will there be an effort made to disseminate that
Yes,
information?
we're actually putting together a citizen guide that actually will play into giving people more information about the master plan, but we're hoping to set up community venues to actually get more people from the community to begin to talk about those quality of life issues that in relation to us developing this land process, they understand their role as a citizen within this community. And that's what we find as the city planners, that there's not enough information going into the community to help people understand what is the difference between quantifiable and qualifiable issues. And that's what we're going to begin to work on too. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And I just want to state that it's, you're going to find a lot of this, that it's got to work in tandem with other programs and other things going on, because the parameters of what you do in an LDO is very narrowly drawn. It doesn't care if you own or you rent. It cares about where is the building sitting on the lot
Right.
and what it's being used for. So as these issues emerge, it's important to kind of conduct these conversations with the city, saying we think these additional impacts may come. What is the strategy going forward?
Right.
It can't all get folded into this. I mean, a lot of times people think the ordinance is everything it does everything, but it really doesn't. And in particular in Jersey, it's very narrowly drawn in terms of what it can do.
I guess that was my question, is there due diligence being done on the part of all parties to ensure that those things are being taken into consideration and contingency plans are being made to support the people who are currently fall within these
And that's why the city hired the consultants to actually talk about, like, okay, what are our next steps? Because we've been hearing about, okay, you guys got this master plan, what's happening? Well, there's a process in all things, so we already thought about all of the quality of life issues that may spring out of this, and how do we deal with that? Making sure that information is in place. So I'm gonna ask that you guys just give us patience, because there's only two of us working on this. But however, that's where I'm glad you brought up again, because we are thinking in the same frame, that we need to get information out to our constituents so that they can understand that while we're developing this ordinance to speak and be consistent with the existing master plan so that we can have better development in the city, we know that there's going to be quality of life issues that are going to impact that, and how do we make sure that it is beneficial versus negative?
Thank you.
Ma'am,
Yeah, this is more mundane, but, you know, you talked about lot sizes and, you know, kind of looking forward, but looking backward, I've always been concerned about the tendency to kind of move towards suburban-looking models and suburban, you know, lot sizes. And the biggest illustration of that bugs the hell out of me is when you go up North Clinton Avenue past the train station, and there's these industrial buildings that were all built by one developer, but somehow the city made him put big front lawns and big side lawns, which industrial buildings don't need, and we could have had bigger buildings, more ratables, more whatever. And when I talked to the owner, I said, what'd you do that for? And he says, because the city made me do it. And it's just suburbanizing. It's just craziness. And then, so when you talked about the housing, the big lots, I understand you to say you're cutting it back from what was in the Trent 250 plan, but when you talk about 6,000 square foot lots, I don't even know where you put those. I mean, you're talking about 60 by 100 foot lots. There's not even land in the city where you could set up a development like that. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, well, Trenton is a built-out community, right?
Yeah.
So there's not really much space to put anything new. Essentially, what we did in terms of looking at the lot sizes was pull apart basically what are the patterns that are already here on the ground. I can tell you those large lot single-family districts are a tiny percentage of what we see on the ground here. I think between that RL1 and RL2, we're talking maybe 3% of the residential lots within the city, and the high density is maybe closer to 80% of the residential lots within the city. So what we've done is, instead of sort of having the blunt instrument of the RA and the RB districts, we've just kind of created a gradation so that we're ensuring that where those 3% fall, if that's the character of that area, that it has its own district moving forward. And that where those smaller lots are, we're not trying to impose a larger lot standard on them. We've got a 1,000 square foot lot now that in the high density residential, right, that's just a 1,000 square foot lot that allows all housing types on it. That didn't exist previously. And that's a pattern that's many places throughout the city. So where it is now, all of those lots are currently non-conforming. You identify all the different patterns and develop districts that kind of make everything as it is now conforming.
Well, if they're 80%, list them first.
It's convention. You have to start from the lowest to the highest. You start from the lowest to the highest intensity. It's just,
We'll
yeah.
get over it. We can do it different.
I have something a little more specific where I'll probably have to give it Stephanie Davis a real answer, but about 15, 20 years ago, when they was calling it the train station redevelopment, and they were talking about the Chestnut Avenue Bridge in Monmouth Street Bridge being raised, and now it's turned into the Lincoln Avenue Bridge is now the priority, and the construction to change that is supposed to start in 2019. So my question is, like, with this lady, when, and then somebody from the city had already contacted me. I worked in this East Ward, and they had contacted us, and they met with us, this Enterprise Foundation people, and they said that they were working on taking what we had said back to the city. So making a long story short, in regards to what these people have said better than I can say, where, Stephanie, and who do I come to find out when they're gonna get with us homeowners on Thompson Street and Walnut Avenue and East State Street from the 500 block up to about the 800 block, so we can see how this is going to impact on our quality of life?
Well, I believe you're talking about when you guys have been working with JR and some of the other,
No, it started out being Owls and Zenith.
Okay.
And then it went to Mr. Patel from the Enterprise Foundation.
I'm really glad you
taking
state that.
all of
This is a
those
group also
plans.
too that we're hoping that will come to the city and make this as part of maybe another plan that can be endorsed by the master plan. I would say that's a work in progress, and as soon as I get more information, I can let you know. But again, I don't have all of the previous, especially working with a lot of the agencies outside of the city. We're hoping that a lot of the agencies and community groups, when they come together, that when they formulate whatever they want in that particular neighborhood, that they will come to the city and they will petition and say, hey, we think this plan would be very excellent as an endorsement to the plan. Can we do that? And we're hoping that will happen.
But that's what Enterprise told us they were doing.
You know what?
They said that.
And most
what they
likely it's
was-
probably gonna happen, but in time. That's what I'm saying. Probably is gonna happen. But again, we're just making sure that we're giving these steps. And this is actually something separate from that at this moment. This is.
Yeah, we don't know who they are.
We don't know at this time. They would
Sir?
know.
Just a quick question. First off, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you to the mayor for pulling this together. I'm also an attorney, and I do lots of land use. And I'm very concerned when I come into a town, I don't know what I can anticipate or expect. More importantly, what I can advise a client. So this is a great effort. Again, thanks to the mayor and Stephanie. I've known you for a bunch of years, a while.
We're
a
trying.
while. But the other piece is, I think, answers the question that you had, ma'am, is you're registered that you signed in on? Convenient, registered. But that you're signing in on, I imagine it'll generate a list for contacting for future.
Yes,
things.
oh,
So
thank
it'll
you.
be great distribution of information because it has to be driven by the community. These are buildings. It's not a community. People are the community. So we'll have to put that together. But again, I just want to thank you all for the efforts.
Thank you so much. And you reminded me, if you go to Trenton250LDOupdate.com, there is a comment form, so you can send us comments and concerns. Stephanie gets them, Chris gets them, I get them, Jeffrey Wilkerson gets them as well. Also, if you go in there and you sign up on the website, in addition to the city's emails and Isles' emails from the website, you will get emails from us as soon as we post anything, updating anything on there. So if there's a new download or a meeting notice, if you sign up through the website, it'll shoot it to you for the LDO only. We're not any other city projects, just this LDO project.
So if you're a baby boomer and you're not into this modern technology, how do I find out? Is something coming to me in the mail? Will there be a poster in the post office, the library? Because I'm not social media.
And we understand that too, Ms. Burley. We understand that too. What Jeff had me do is actually download a lot of this by request. If you want a hard copy, we can send it to you. But we make sure that you have your address.
How are
on
you
that.
getting the information to the senior citizens that are not interested in this modern way of communicating? How will my grandmother know that this is going to happen in her neighborhood, and so that you can hear her input?
So we're going to do, there's a couple things. So we're kind of wrapping up these meetings. So, and when we're doing these meetings, like tonight will be before planning board, and next week will be before the council, hopefully. Fingers crossed we're on the agenda. So when we're doing presentations to the public, we're coming back to the city. So if she's following, if seniors are following, or anybody who's not is following kind of the agendas of what the city's doing, we'll be bringing these presentations there, so that's one thing. But the next thing will be, the next time we come back will be when we're actually bringing the draft out, and that's a much different push in terms of publicity. We don't know the full scope of that yet. We have to sit and talk with Isles and come up with a strategy, but that comes because you're looking at the full LDO document, and this will be in the next year. It'll be in the early part of 2020. We're going to look at doing posters, getting things out there, figuring out how we contact people. We don't know what that is, but we know that that's a much kind of bigger push once that document is out there.
I would like to suggest somehow it become part of the school district information, put it on the Board of Education website, share it with your community neighborhood centers, the safe havens, the senior citizens, oh yes, the churches.
Yeah, we can do that.
Because a lot of
We've done
people
that.
are still into the paper system. They're not into, looking at stuff on a screen and a little device and your eyes can't see what's on there.
But I don't know that these questions apply to this process at all, but I'd love to learn. So a couple of things. One about sort of environmental issues, energy requirements. The state, there's a new energy master plan, I gather, that's
Building code.
building codes.
Building code and other outside, and you may end up adopting an energy efficient code, but it's not part of the
Not
LDO.
part of that.
Because
Okay.
you're getting onto the interior of buildings.
Understand. And what about the state's presence in the city? How does that interact with the LDO? And
We ask nicely that they follow it.
Yes,
We ask very nicely that they follow it, but they're the state.
they're the state and the
It's-
county.
yeah.
As Arista stated earlier, we try our best to keep in step with the municipal land use law. And there's something in the law, Title 55, Title 31, it's a courtesy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do.
It's
I
actually,
remember the
it's a
number.
courtesy, it's called Title 31, where we literally, in the city, we go to the county, the state, and the school facilities, and we pretty much beg them, can you please give us a courtesy to let us know what you're building? Again, it's up to them. They can say yes or they can say no. The state-
on property that's
on-
already there.
Exactly, yes.
Oh, no, anything, even if they buy anything that they're developing.
Anything.
So they can buy something
They can do anything.
They
Oh,
can.
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
in another district and put some, whatever they want.
And
on
They
it.
don't
within the
have
city of
any
Trenton, the
company
city of
that
Trenton
does
is actually, a lot of the state buildings are in the city of Trenton.
Right.
They can say to us, no, we don't want to give you a courtesy to let you know what you're developing.
And it's
Not
everywhere.
far.
It's
It's
not
every-
just
it's-
Trenton.
it's
It
not
is the
just-
United States from coast to coast. The
Right.
state can come in, the
City
county can
council
come in, they have the, because the power comes down.
There's eminent
Exactly.
domain.
And
I'm-
even
I'm-
when they do, they don't have to.
Is that eminent domain? Is that the same thing?
No, that's a whole
That's
different
a whole
thing.
other thing. Because exactly like you said, it's coming down. So within the MLUL, we have the right to say, hey, state, you're building a building on the corner of East State and Broad Street. Can you please let us know what you're building? They can say no. But believe it or not, the state and the county have been very amicable, and they have come before a planning board to let us know what they're
And
building.
then very amicably ignored everything the planning board says. That's all.
And all that is that we can make recommendations, but you're right, they pretty much,
That's where
and
the
we do, we
citizens
make
have to make real
recommendations.
pressure on them.
Yeah,
We gotta
what
string
can the
them out.
citizens do?
We gotta
Nothing.
organize.
That's
Well,
Nothing, I mean,
the
honestly,
devil
nothing.
is
No, no,
a
you
liar.
gotta use some political power. We gotta
Yeah,
be
now
organized.
that's outside of our domain, that you
Right.
guys gotta go, you talk to your political parties, but.
This is, we work across the country. This is every city in every state, everywhere has the same problem. State school comes in, wants to build a state school. They don't have to listen to
It's
anybody, whatever
everywhere.
you say. It's a universal problem, in particular with capital cities or cities with a lot of, a giant government presence.
Right, Harrisburg.
It's just,
And it can be illegal
Oh,
and
yeah.
harmful, and 2 years later you find out it's killing people. And, well, somebody, I would suggest that, I know you all can do this because of your job, and I'll try to do it as a citizen, that we as citizens need to let people know, and we need to do what we're supposed to do as citizens, because the government is supposed to be working for us, and we elect them to represent them, and if we're gonna allow them to build stuff that's not safe, but then we gotta go by lesser, lower laws and go through all of this bureaucratic process. We as people need
Yeah,
to start doing something, 'cause especially you all are paying taxes and,
So I just want to balance that a little bit. As a recovering architect, I have to let you know that the state will hire a registered architect. And the architect, even though they don't have to follow zoning regulations or the LDO regulations, they do have to follow building code regulations and site design standards and things like that. So they're all sort of public safety is the focus.
So they would have to go to the zoning board and get permits?
No, they
No,
don't.
it's to the building
But they
department.
do have to have a building that's up to building code standards, and New Jersey has, you know, a very
So we
progressive
have
building
to
code
wait till
standard.
the building get built and a brick fall on my child's head when we fall through steps
So
and then go complain and
Actually,
then
that's
they'll
the least
get
of it. They build big, safe
penalized.
houses for themselves. They're building nice, big, expensive buildings for themselves. The problem is, they're putting it in locations that hurt our plan, hurt our downtown. They put all their people at the fringe of downtown, for instance, these two big new buildings. And our downtown is half boarded up as it is. They're gonna hurt those businesses that are there that count on those people as customers, and they don't care.
All right, I want to move off this because you guys can kind of take this offline. I just want to make sure there's any LDO questions.
Just a one about newer parks, new urban forests, new that kind of stuff. Is that, there are existing pieces of land that are used that way, right? Is that
Yeah.
something that you all look at, the desirability of open space? where
It
there isn't
doesn't,
any?
we don't stand in the way. We create, as Chris pointed out, a district that can help you protect the ones that you have now, make them a park district, and you can maybe, if you can identify natural areas, even kind of adding those into that district and protect them from other development. But the actual kind of programming and installation and creation of additional open space is outside of this process.
I mean, what we do is essentially create a use that's a park, and we allow it to be anywhere, but we can't ever, you know, we can't make things up like that.
And this is part of our Trent 250 plan that we were working on 4 years ago when we had all the community meetings, and all of those community meetings, our input is in here.
It's basically the regulations we're drafting. Now, remember, Trenton 250 is a big document with a lot of ideas. The LDO, the Land Development Ordinance, doesn't get all of them. You have to have other plans, like a kind of a capital parks plan that is looking at kind of where you're gonna put parks, the contingency plans, these are all, they're separate. The LDO doesn't do everything. What we're dealing with is the kind of physical aspect of Trenton 250. Kind of when you looked at the community forum and that's what you said you wanted, that's what we're trying to capture within it.
And I think that's worth pointing out too, that every single plan that's adopted is supposed to be a living, breathing document that carries on throughout that generation that it's proposed for, whether it's 2042 with Trend 250, whether it's, say, a park plan that looks at the next 10, 15 years. Every plan is supposed to be referencing each other and being consistent along the way as a living, breathing document. So that's an accountability issue too, is to make sure that all those plans factor into one another.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all for coming.
I ask
Really
that you spread
appreciate
the
it.
word out and just let everyone know, hey, we're here, we've updated the zoning ordinance.